How are you doing today, Jeremy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Absolutely fantastic. I want you to know that, wow, this is serving the people, this podcast, because you are coming into this area of transitioning news to real people at a time when, my God, the world's at war and we have a presidential election. We can't get anybody as Speaker of the House, and we need to know what the entire country is talking about, and your focus is on the middle of the country. God bless you. God bless you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's simple at its core, but the fact is, as somebody who grew up in the middle of the country, I think it's really important that these voices be a part of our national conversation on a weekly basis, and not just, the usual suspects that get to spend all day long as talking heads sitting in New York and Washington and other places on the coast talking about what's going on in very polarized ways. I think we ought to have voices from the political middle, the geographic middle, much more of a part of our conversation.
Yeah, because we always sit there and we hear these stories about the Iowa caucus, and we hear about the primaries in Middle America, and it's like, who are these people? I traveled through it once coming from Montana, but I don't know who they are as people.
Exactly. And by the way, I grew up in central Illinois. I could not have a more different existence than somebody who grew up in Iowa or somebody who grew up in Indiana or somebody who grew up in Michigan. They're very different places. And I think that's the sort of coastal view of the broad middle of the country, is that it's all one big blob. Well, it's not. It's just as sort of dynamic and interesting and complex as other places in this country. And you also have people who don't spend every minute thinking about politics and what's good for the red team and what's good for the blue team. There are obviously some people who do that, but not everybody. And I think bringing in those voices that are just more interested in the rational, reasonable way to get things done, and not just what's going to help this member of Congress or that member.
You're so right about that, because growing up in the state of Montana, as farmers, we got out there in those fields in the daytime. There wasn't anything about politics or anything like that until the Mercantile Report came up at 12 o'clock during that news period. Other than that, we had to get back out into those fields again, because survival was everything to us out there.
Exactly. I mean, I grew up the child of two classical pianists, and I was one of 7 children. And they had a lot to think about. That, they were engaged in terms of they watched the news and they read the news, but they were not. They never talked to me about politics when I was a kid. Like, it just wasn't a thing that we talked about. They wanted to make sure that we had enough food to put on the table, and that everybody got to their baseball practice or whatever. But that's what they were worried about. And I think that's for most people. They're not sitting there thinking about politics every minute.
What's really interesting about you and the podcast is the fact that you are really getting yourself involved in this in a way that God, man, back in 2012 when I started, the big company said, we don't know what you're doing, just keep doing it, we'll figure it out later. But man, you have figured it out, because not only do you have the podcast where anybody at any time can tune in, but my God, your NPR is going to put you on at night, which is just so incredible, because that's when most people are free from their jobs.
Yeah, it is on NPR stations, but it's actually an independent production. We went out and sold it to individual stations ourselves, and got it on, at this point, almost 380 stations around the country, including I think 6 of the top 10 markets right now are carrying the show. So it is, and that's what really makes it amazing, is that it is, in addition to the podcast, it's a live show that's on live. Because it's in the evening, it can be on live almost everywhere where it's airing. They're not putting it on a tape delay time. So you have hundreds of people trying to call in, and therefore we get just really amazing callers. Last night we did a show on opioid addiction and the opioid crisis, and we had a guy that was on his way to rehab after having OD'd on fentanyl 2 days ago, and it was just such a powerful call to hear across the country.
Listeners need to understand that when you bring people onto the show, it's real people, and that's what's going to be fascinating about this. Sure, you're going to have some people that might be an expert in it, but everybody's going to learn together. Right, and yeah, we have 2 panel guests on the show, and because it's done in the evening, I wanted to have like a DJ, like a late night talk show. So we have this guy Tolliver, who's awesome, who grew up on the south side of Chicago. He's a funk musician. He's there with us. But then, yes, we have everyday people. We have calls from around the country. I try to get to as many as we can in the hour, and we end up getting to probably up to 10 calls in the course of the hour-long show, and they are coming from all over the place. And I've said to the stations, even the coastal stations that took this show, I said, look, if the rest of public radio
weights the day 80-20 towards the coast. We're going to weight it 80-20 towards the middle. It doesn't mean you can't get on the show if you're calling from Boston or Philadelphia or Charlotte, but it does mean that we are going to try to bring the voices from the middle forward because they don't have anywhere else.
So how do you come up with each night's subjects? Because the reason why I bring that up is because I believe that I'm a silent wolf. I sit beneath the limbs of the trees and I watch the world, and therefore that becomes my subjects. Is it the same thing for you? Is that you're just sitting here watching everybody go by? That's my subject tonight.
Look, we have a running list, and every time we come up with a good one, we put it on there. But we've done, the next show is going to be are our politicians too old?
Yeah.
This week, we did the opioid crisis. We did Israel and Gaza. We did the first show that we did as we started about a month ago was how do you talk to people that you disagree with politically? So we're just sort of trying to line up different shows that might be interesting to people. But I also don't want to just be a regurgitation of the echo chamber of sort of political talk shows. I don't want to just talk about what everybody else is doing. I actually am interested in bringing forward other topics. And by the way, on the opioid one, that is a subject that is so important to so many people around this country, and it gets pushed aside constantly by other news, whether it's a war in the Middle East or whether it's an economic calamity or whatever. But I'm glad we took an hour to actually talk about that last night because it's an important issue that matters.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't talking about it because we're trying to get around it. But dude, I'm that guy who speaks at funerals, opioid funerals, and because I've got the courage and the confidence to step up there because I know the friends that are addicted are coming in there to say so long to their friend, and it's like I got to get that message into their hearts when they step outside of that church. It's a new world, hopefully.
Absolutely, and we had a caller that was on his way to rehab after having overdosed on fentanyl a couple of days earlier. We had a caller whose son was shot in the head. It was an addict. His son was shot in the head, and she said it saved his life because it actually woke him up to what was going on. It's just amazing, the people that called in.
You got real authentic with the Israel and Hamas story. I was so gripped into that, and I'm thinking, my God, this is interesting that a podcast has got my attention so deeply, and I was emotionally involved in it.
Yeah, and by the way, that was the topic that we changed a few days before. We weren't going to do that. Obviously, the attack in Israel hadn't happened yet. But that weekend, I talked to my team and was like, let's change topics, and we did. And they were worried. They said, Jeremy, you got to be careful about this one. Mm-hmm. We're going to open up the phones live to people on this very emotional topic. And in the end, I couldn't believe it. People were really. It was a civil conversation where people had really good questions about what was going on and what it meant for them. And I'm glad that we did it.
One of the things that we in radio and broadcasting and podcasting never, ever talk about are the phone screeners, the importance of that person, because they've got to know, and they do know the rules, who's getting on the air and why are you calling.
Exactly. And I have a couple of incredibly good call screeners. And, that is the one thing is, I will say, I don't get to see them in action because I am on the air when they're there. So I have to rely on my producer who's like, wow, they did a really good job tonight. They had to deal with this person or that person, or this person called back in and said, why didn't you put me on the air? But yes, call screeners are very important. The other thing that we do have that people don't talk about that much is an 8-second delay, which we have not, knock on wood, had to use yet. But if somebody were to swear or something like that, we can erase the last 8 seconds of the show, and nobody will be any the wiser.
Live radio broadcasting versus podcasting, that's two complete different beasts. How are you handling that, Jeremy?
Well, look, I think good content is good content. And my hope is that the live show provides good enough content that it is great to listen to the next day or 2 days later or 3 days later than it actually is on live. I think the one thing that we have to be careful about in that sense is, last night our live show was on at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. President Biden spoke at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, he spoke not about what we were talking about, but do I come on the show and say, we just finished listening to President Biden? I didn't do that because somebody's going to listen to this today, somebody's going to listen to this tomorrow, and they're not going to care that happened 2 minutes before we got on the air. But I think there is something really special about live. there is, not just as a listener, but as somebody who's on the live show, when my guests are on the live show, they're walking a tightrope in a way that you're just not when you're taped. And they have to be more authentic. And I think that in the end, what Americans are looking for is authenticity.
Yep.
And that's why I think the middle plays into that too, because it's people that are not saying, I want to help red team or blue team. I'm actually trying to, move forward in my life and find solutions to things. And I think that makes it more authentic, but I think live makes it more authentic.
One of the things that listeners need to do when they tune into the podcast is, but please start at episode number 1, because I love that little interview banter that you did, because it really set me up as a listener on what I should expect, because you're going into this as a broadcaster and a podcaster, but you're also going into it to be a connector.
Yeah, and I think that's the other meaning of the middle, is meet in the middle. And I think whether you actually think of yourself as somebody who's in the political middle, or whether you're in the geographic middle, or whether you are in the middle as a state of mind, doesn't matter. If you are willing to meet in the middle and hear from people who disagree with you. And I think what could be more American than that, than actually being willing to have a conversation and listen to different points of view. That's the amazing thing about being in a melting pot country. We have people with all different views who come from different backgrounds, have different ideas about things, but we are willing to talk to each other and be in the same room with each other and thrive because of that. So I think, meeting in the middle is a big part of what this show is.
Wouldn't you say our connection with you, Jeremy, is because you're so transparent and you're so real? You aren't afraid. You're not hiding behind rocks. You're openly gay, and it's like you're saying, "I'm just you guys, man. We're having a conversation here. Let's just meet in the middle," like you say.
Look, I think. I hope that that's the case, that people see that I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm just trying to tell you, what I'm thinking, and be a little more open and honest about things. I will say, though, that the fact that this is an independent production, obviously we have a connection with iHeart because of the podcast, and we're on all these public radio stations, but I don't have an NPR behind me as I have in the past. This is an independent production, and I think the fact that it's an independent production makes it easier for me to not have to think about what I'm saying as much as I have in the past. I don't have to answer to a boss at NPR who says, well, I don't think you should do the show in Israel and Gaza because we got to be careful about this or that. Not that they would necessarily say that, but it does increase, I think, the authenticity to be able to be, this is just a show that I'm doing, and I don't have to answer to anybody.
It's so funny that you bring that up, because the one thing that, when I transitioned into doing it by myself, it was like all of a sudden you have this heart full of freedom, but then it's like, well, what are we going to talk about? And now it's a different sort of business. Are you relying on any of the old tricks that your program directors and news directors shared with you? It's like when your parents would tell you to do something and you're going, no, and then when you become an adult, it's like, yeah, I understand why they said it.
Well, there are a lot of things that I am learning as I go. I mean, one of the things is that I'm a small business owner now. I have to learn things like how to use QuickBooks and stuff like that. But I think in terms of the broadcasting, I've definitely picked up tricks from different places along the way. I don't want to overthink everything. There is something about the live aspect and just being reactive in the moment. I used to watch like Larry King Live when I was growing up.
Yes.
And which, by the way, is on at the exact same time as the middle is live, 9 p.m. Eastern time. I think that there's something really nice about the evening for a show like this. It's just a little bit more relaxed. But the other thing, one thing I've stolen now from Larry King Live twice on 2 different shows, is we've been using some historic tape about the topic to go into the breaks. So like right before we go into our 2 little breaks in the middle of the show, our DJ will say, listen to this clip from this thing that happened in the past. And in the Israel and Gaza episode, we played a clip of Bill Clinton talking about the Oslo Peace Accords in the 90s. And we played a clip of Tom Brokaw talking about the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s. And it was just this interesting little thing that, by the way, I remember, Larry King, we were talking to Bette Midler or something, and then you'd go into the break with this old clip of her on a movie from long ago. So do you still consider yourself to be a broadcaster versus a podcaster versus a journalist? Because that's been one of my biggest struggles. I tell people, I've been in broadcasting for 44 years. Dude, you've been a podcaster for the past 12. No, that doesn't qualify. Look, I still have way more experience in broadcasting, but I do see that the podcast, if this show is going to be successful, the podcast is going to be a huge part of that. So, by the way, I hope everybody goes and downloads The Middle with Jeremy Hobson on their podcast app, because that's how we're going to make enough money to keep this show going. I want to learn more as much as I can, and I'm trying to do that as we go. But I also, the broadcast version is on hundreds of stations around the country. I want to make sure that I don't lose sight of that as we do the show.
Yeah. So how are you dealing with the numbers? In other words, that's one of the biggest addictions for a lot of podcasters. It's like, oh, let me see my analytics. How are you keeping yourself away from that? Do you have yourself a bodyguard to say, Jeremy, don't do it. Don't go near the numbers. We don't care right now.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that. I should stop doing that. I have been looking at the numbers. I'm like, oh well, we're early stages. It'll go up. No, but what I'm focusing on is right now at this beginning point is the number of stations that we're on live, because that is at this point, as we grow the podcast, the live stations are a huge part of our audience. I just am pleased to see this morning that Chicago Public Radio is now put us permanently on their schedule, which brings us to 6 of the top 10 markets in the country, which is really great, especially as somebody who grew up in Illinois. I'm very excited about that. But, it's hard to – I want to just focus on doing the show. The longer we go on, the more we do, the more I get my team, up to speed on how to, make sure we book the best guests and get the right information for me to read in advance of the programs, et cetera. The more I can just focus on doing the show, which is what I want to do. I love broadcasting, as I'm sure you do, and it's a lot of fun, and I want to focus on that, not on analytics.
Show prep is everything, Jeremy. I'm already working on next week's interviews and conversations. So how far in advance do you do your stuff?
I am glued to the news all the time. So if it's something like the war in Israel and Gaza, I'm already prepped on that in some ways. And in 10 years of hosting Here and Now and Marketplace Morning Report, and before that, many years as a reporter and producer, I've covered a lot of things. So I have a general base of knowledge on certain things. But in terms of prepping for a show like the opioid crisis show that we just did, in probably a week of just kind of I'm not spending every waking minute, but I also, when I go talk to friends, I'll ask them about it, and maybe that will give me something that will be something I can use in the show, even more than if I read it in an article.
Man, I'm so proud of you. I am just so proud of you, because you are that bridge between two different worlds, and now we need to get you on television so you can be a part, become that king of all media.
Your lips to God's ears. Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, please come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you, Jeremy.
You too. We got to get you on The Middle.
All right, let's do it. Hey, well, let's do it. Will you be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you so much. You too.